What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel, and today we are going to be reviewing the latest addition to the Thrawn Ascendancy trilogy, which is Greater Good. This is the second installment in the series now, with Chaos Rising coming out late last year, and once again it is written by the man himself, Timothy Zahn, who pretty much goes hand in hand with anything to do with Thrawn, and honestly anything that he does you can pretty much expect it to be pretty decent, as he has built quite the reputation for himself when it comes to writing Star Wars novels. This book definitely lived up to those expectations, as I really enjoyed it. I'm honestly quite a slow reader, and I finished all 410 pages in 3 days, so that kind of speaks volumes about how much the book managed to hook me from the start, and although it wasn't perfect, I really did enjoy the book for the most part. We saw a lot of the same characters in Greater Good that we saw in Chaos Rising, so it didn't feel as though it had as much of a slow start, since there wasn't quite as much of an introduction that was needed to start the book. It kind of just started where it left off and was pretty quick to get right into the action, which is always a great way to start a book in my opinion, at least whenever possible anyway, as obviously sometimes those slower beginnings are just needed to introduce the reader to the context and the characters and stuff like that, but that definitely wasn't an issue in this one. I found myself mostly enjoying the same characters that I enjoyed in Chaos Rising as well. Honestly, a lot of the characters really didn't do all that much for me, but Thalius, Cherie, and obviously Thrawn all had great arcs for me personally, and pretty much any time they were in a scene I was completely hooked and just wanted to keep on reading, which is obviously a sign of some great writing as well as some great characters. Now, despite some of those characters being really great, I did honestly find it a little bit hard to follow at times when it came to certain other characters in the book. With the way that the Chiss family names work, so many characters have really similar names, and I also find a lot of them to be pretty hard to pronounce in my head when I'm reading along, so at times it did get a little bit tedious or became a bit of a struggle to get through for those reasons, which was fine for me as I was just excited to get through it as fast as I could for the review. But I feel as though if you're reading it purely for enjoyment, which to be honest like 99% of people are going to be reading it for that reason, then struggling through a book is never really a good sign. Now that could just be me, honestly I'm not really sure if other people feel the same about the character names and all of that, and honestly most of the more common characters are referred to by their abbreviated names anyway, such as Thrawn or Thalius for example, but yeah, I personally did just find it a little bit hard at times, and I'm sure I'm probably not the only one who did. Something else that is both a good thing and a bad thing when it comes to the Thrawn Ascendancy series is that it honestly doesn't feel all that much like a Star Wars story. Now I've not actually seen Star Trek or Battlestar Galactica, so I'm certain that I'm way off here, but to me it feels like what I expect those franchises to feel like, if that makes any sense. It feels more like what I imagine Battlestar Galactica feels like than it feels like the Star Wars that I know and love. Now the positives to that are definitely abundant, as it's not held back by any other canon material out there, and it doesn't need to fit neatly into the rest of the story, which obviously just gives the story a bit more freedom. When a book like Master and Apprentice is written, for example, Claudia Gray needs to make sure it all lines up with the prequels and the rest of Star Wars canon, which somewhat takes away from her freedom in a way. With Thrawn Ascendancy though, being set way out in the unknown regions, a place that we currently know pretty much nothing about, that gives Timothy Zahn the freedom to go wherever he wants to go, as it honestly doesn't even link to any other canon material other than some very small Easter eggs here and there, and then obviously just the overall story will eventually come into play I'm sure, but the cultures of each species, the planet, the strategies, the hierarchies, none of that stuff really links to any current Star Wars canon, meaning Zahn doesn't really need to adhere to all those other guidelines set by the previous media. The other great thing about it being fairly distant from the typical Star Wars style is that it really does give a nice, refreshing, unique take on Star Wars, which I think is always a great thing for the most part. When every story feels pretty similar and the planets, the themes and the settings are all similar to each other, that can lead to what's often referred to as franchise fatigue, so I always say that I think change and variety are definitely a great thing. Now, despite me saying that, I do think that sometimes I had to remember that I was reading a Star Wars novel, as it often doesn't feel like that was the case, and when you sit down wanting to read a few chapters of a Star Wars book only for it to not really feel at all like Star Wars, that can be a little bit jarring, I guess. Now, that's probably my fault, because I should have known, judging by Chaos Rising, that this would be written in that style, so I'm not really going to blame the writing there or anything like that, but I thought I would just mention that in case maybe some of you guys are interested in the book, but you're expecting it to be like super Star Warsy, which is just definitely not the case. That doesn't take away from the book at all, as like I mentioned, there are positives that come along with those negatives, and I'd argue that the positives of it being unique and refreshing probably outweigh that non-Star Wars feeling that I got. But yeah, I just thought that was worth mentioning. Overall, I thought it was another great addition to the Star Wars canon, and I think it also sets up really well for the final installment, which will be called Lesser Evil. I think that's going to have a really epic conclusion, and without spoiling anything, I think it will cover a lot of the questions that we had about Thrawn's past when reading the original canon trilogy, as his His past is very mysterious, and the likes of the Chiss and the Grisk are definitely going to get a bit of a better explanation in the final book, so I'm definitely excited for that. If you're a fan of Thrawn from some other books that you've read or even from Star Wars Rebels, then I would definitely recommend this book to you guys, but like I mentioned earlier, it's also not really a super Star Warsy type of book, if that makes sense. So if you're really looking for something that oozes Star Wars and lightsabers and the Force and all that kind of stuff, then this might not be the one for you, or at least not at the top of your priority list anyway. But anyway guys, that is going to do it for this one. If you enjoyed the video, then be sure to leave a like down below, and if you are new, then consider subscribing to the channel with those notifications on. Thank you all so much for watching. You guys have a great day, and I'll catch you all in the next one.
Crush them! Make them suffer!